real chance she'll get elected, so keep your eye on it. On the same day, Sue, the same weekend, Lucy Haslam has a big medical cannabis seminar happening at Tweed Heads. That's a big deal for 3 days. There's a poster there fallen down already, and there's some flyers outside. So grab a flyer and pass them on to friends. So you can book that online now. That's the election weekend. I hadn't realised, Sue. She's gone.
No, I'm here.
Here you are. You can have a flyer, just in case you're bored. But she'll have a big job after that weekend, I reckon. I appreciate you coming, Sue. She's a beauty. And now I want to introduce Leah Bisiani. It's Leah Bisiani. It's Leah's first visit to Nimbin. And and we're really pleased. Thanks heaps for coming. Really appreciate it. She will introduce herself better.
Yeah, probably.
Good idea.
Hello, Nimbin.
Hello.
So nice to be here. Like Michael said, it's my first trip here, and so far it's been an absolute delight. In fact, I could be said as getting quite high on the environment. It's been pretty cool. I'm really feel quite privileged to have been invited to come here and speak to you guys. I'm a registered nurse Div 1 with my Masters in Health Science with a dementia stream, and I'm a dementia and aged care consultant. So I've worked in aged care for 35 years. And in that time, I've become a global leader in regards to advocating for the rights of our aged population, as well as specifically people living with dementia. I will make a quick disclaimer while I'm sitting here. Today, I won't be talking about giving medicinal cannabis to people living with dementia. I will be concentrating on a very huge and significant issue in aged care, which is unalleviated chronic pain in our aged care population. So we'll be looking at pain in the context of musculoskeletal pain. We'll be looking at neuropathic pain. We'll be looking at pain in regards to life-limiting illness and palliation, which are all crucial areas that up until this point the medical cohort unfortunately haven't really got a handle on. About 73% of our aged care population on current pain management regimes are ineffectively having their pain managed. So this potentially means that they're living for decades with relentless, excruciating, chronic, debilitating pain. Now, you would think in this day and age, if we can send people to the moon, we'd be able to actually manage people's pain a little bit more effectively. So what I've been doing in regards to looking at chronic pain is using my reputation in the medical field, which is a very strong reputation, to actually advocate for something else that I believe very strongly in, which is actually looking at alternative approaches that will benefit our aged care population in regards to their chronic pain. So I have spent the last 35 years, as I said, dispelling a lot of the myths associated with the medical paradigm. Even though I work in this industry, I do like to challenge a lot of what I observe. And after observing people, elderly people, for so long, trying to exist in a world of pain is something that creates a lot of it actually creates a lack of hope, because you look at it and you actually feel helpless, because you can actually assist people in so many ways when they get older, because a lot of the conditions that older people live with are quite debilitating, and most of them have pain associated with them. So to not be able to actually aid them in that way and alleviate their suffering is something that's always been very hard for me, because I work from a lot of compassion, I work with my heart, I work with empathy, and I actually take on that pain. I can actually feel that pain that people are suffering. And if I can't do anything about it, it makes me feel like I'm failing my duty of care to our older population in need. With the baby boomers coming into the forefront, we've got an 80% increase in our aged care population. That's a massive amount of people. People live longer now. through medical technology, but also each generation lives longer. So we've got people living well into their 80s and 90s, and they're still not having their pain alleviated. So when I started looking at... Oh, we've already skipped a slide, have we? That's okay. No, that's all right. I just wasn't sure that where we were up to. So my aim is to actually honour the Hippocratic Oath, which anybody that works in the medical profession abides by, which is do no harm. And what I did a study on the year before last was looking at the current landscape in regards to chronic pain in aged care and actually identifying that we have a major problem on our hands and that we need to look at an alternative and that there is an alternative. So not only have we established what the problem is, we can actually sit there and say to people, we do have an alternative that will benefit our older population. So this is why we must consider medicinal cannabis as a viable option in alleviating the chronic pain of our old care population. Because if we don't, are we not then condoning gross neglect of a nation? And if we're condoning gross neglect and allowing people to deteriorate on the current regimes, that in my book is heinous and it cannot be allowed. So what I'm doing now is challenging that medical paradigm, challenging the fact that we have the evidence to back that the regimes that people are on, and most of them are opioid regimes, are not actually meeting the needs or the pain needs of our older population. Yes, in some cases they are successful, and when that's the case, great, because everybody's different and everyone's going to respond to medication or lifestyle changes, environmental changes, nutritional changes differently. We are all individuals in our own right, so what works for one is not going to work for another. And we have to look at it the same way when we look at something like medicinal cannabis as well. We always have to have a very healthy respect for whatever we put into our body. So we need to look at the individual and we need to make every approach individualised, because what we're seeing is a situation where our older generation are actually deteriorating because of the regimes that they're on. Because not only are they on a gross amount of opioids, but because of all the side effects that actually come with those type of pharmacological approaches, we need to be giving people another 10 or 15 adjuvant medications on top of that to counteract all the side effects of the opioids. And then all of those adjuvant medications have side effects of their own. So we cause this actual destructive spiral where people become more debilitated because of all the side effects of the polypharmacy that they're on. So another part of what I was looking at with the research, which I wrote with Professor Chris Haldeman from the University of South Australia. He's a clinical pharmacologist and very well respected in the field. So he came from the pharmacological side, I came from the clinical background, and together we put together a paper that was actually published in the Journal of Pharmacy Practice and Research last year. So we've actually thrown it in the faces of the medical community and the politicians that we know what's going on and we're not going to allow it to continue. Our vision is becoming more tangible. Obviously, there's power in numbers here. And the more people that stick together in regards to dispelling all the myths and the stereotypes and the stigma associated with cannabis, the better. Obviously, jumping up and down and not actually moving forward isn't going to get us anywhere. We do actually need to be very strong in our approaches. We need to support one another and understand that there's a place for all of us in actually promoting what is humane and what is civilised to our society. And we need to also promote the clinical side of what we're looking at and understand that our GPs and our medical professionals are just as crucial and important to this vision and the ethos of what we follow, to every single other person, like the politicians, like the growers, like the people, the scientists, everybody. We all need to actually work together and have a multidisciplinary type of approach here to get the outcomes that we desire. Because we can't afford to be sloppy, because I can tell you, having worked in this industry for as long as I have, one stuff up, the government are going to go, told you, and they're going to withdraw all of their support. Now, yes, the bureaucratic, I was going to say bullshit there, can I say that here? Bureaucratic bullshit is something that we're totally fighting against constantly, as is very rigid conservative views held by a lot of the medical community. However, I've worked in this industry for long enough to know that I can overcome that by actually doing things a certain way. And this is another part of what I think is very important, is having evidence. I'm an evidence-based person. I believe in data because the bottom line is you can't argue with the facts. And if you put the facts in front of somebody in the medical community, once again, if they deny those facts, then that's also considered neglect and actually breaching duty of care. So once again, we need to be able to provide the evidence about what we're talking about. It might take a little bit longer, but we'll get the outcomes that we desire. And if we actually hold together as a powerful force and stand up for the rights of humanity from a compassionate and empathetic viewpoint, then obviously this is where magic happens. This is how you create change. We could shame people into submission because ultimately we know that, especially in politics, it's ego-based. But if we know how to appeal to that ego in the right way, then we're going to actually be able to advocate in a way that people are going to actually see it from a different perspective. It's actually about changing a mindset. It's about changing perspective, because people are very conditioned to thinking a certain way. So if we can actually show people how to think from a different perspective and think outside the box. In fact, I don't believe there is a box. I think we create those boxes for ourselves. So what we need to do is just crumble down all those walls and those boxes and the demonising of a natural organic plant that is grown on this planet, and show people that the actual regimes that we're using now actually is so much more destructive than what we're actually putting in front of them in regards to medicinal cannabis. I mean, the greatest risk factor of opioids and adverse effect is death, fatality. How can you even compare medicinal cannabis and the healing properties of cannabis to something that is being the most widely prescribed drug in aged care in regards to pain relief? How can you even compare that when the greatest risk factor is death? You can't. It's not logical. It's not realistic, and we need to call people out on that. Because if we don't, we're not going to be able to move forward. We actually need to be able to recognise the extent to how we have to change a whole philosophy of care. So, I probably should just launch into it now. So I'll be talking about the therapeutic, a critical and escalating problem. And I'm going to stand up now so I can look at what I'm talking about. So pain has been recognised as a predominant and prevalent human encounter. There is not many people in this world that doesn't suffer some sort of chronic pain at some stage in their life. And obviously, as we get older, this is going to become more prevalent. One of the most poorly managed conditions, often related to ineffective medication regimes. I have a slide that comes on later, but I may as well say it now, because for a very long time we have been very, very reliant on opioid regimes and all the adjuvant medications that go along with that. This started many, many years ago. So you would think after maybe 80 years of using these regimes and finding out how ineffective they are, that people would probably say, okay, maybe we need to look at a different pathway, because doing the same thing over and over again and not getting different results is considered the definition of insanity, Einstein. So basically, what are we doing? Why are we still going over this same regime over and over and over again and expecting it to have a different result when we have the evidence to back that they're not working? We have to know that access to effective pain relief is a God-given human right. No one has the right to say, no, I'm not giving you that to alleviate your pain. No one has that right. How dare we strip people of their human rights in that manner by saying they can't have access to a certain product because it doesn't meet all of the regulatory and due diligence compliance in regards to whatever stigma and stereotype that has been bred by too many years of demonising something way back in the reefer madness when it all started, and alcohol came in and the government, looked at all of the areas in regards to demonising cannabis, because we also need to recognise that what we're talking about is a medicine, and that people need to get over the stigma and the stereotype assisted or associated with street cannabis and understand what we're promoting here is something that's going to benefit our population. When disrespected, it is fundamentally neglectful towards those living with chronic, relentless pain. So we cannot actually condone neglecting our older population any longer. Let's go on to the next slide, eh? So Australia is an ageing population. We've already established that. Chronic pain is more prevalent in people over the age of 45, and it does increase as people age, especially with your musculoskeletal types of conditions, your rheumatoid, your chronic osteoporosis, your osteoarthritis, etc., etc. It's crippling. I have seen old people just crippled by these diseases, in pain every minute of every single day for the rest of their life. Is that not just cruel? And why is it we can't do anything about alleviating that suffering? Chronic pain, the age distribution here you can see. So as people age, it's going to increase. Now, as people do live longer, as I've already said, the 65 age bracket is what I've actually looked at as the most important area, because that's my area of expertise. I know more about it, so that's why I've gone into that niche area. Can we go into the next one? This is the forecast population of Australia, 45 years of older, up until 2050. So you can actually see that there's going to be a huge increase in people that are suffering pain on a day-to-day basis, chronic pain. Not acute pain, which is something that might occur just short-term, but chronic debilitating pain. Okay. Next one, yeah. So Australia has a population of about 25 million people. About 300,000 of those people reside in residential aged care. Now, we looked at residential aged care as our pilot group because we were able to capture the data associated with the medication reviews that are done annually on every single person that lives in residential aged care. It's part of the aged care standards. It's a regulatory compliance issue, and everybody that runs an aged care facility must actually have those annual reviews done by a clinical pharmacologist consultant. And they come in and they look at these regimes that people are on and the gross amount of polypharmacy that they're ordered on a daily basis, and they actually break it down and say, all right, well, we've got some better recommendations here. Let's look at taking someone off that. What are they prescribed it for? It's actually not even relevant. And actually collect the data on the efficacy of those regimes that each person is actually on. So what we did was we actually looked at all of that data so that we could write the paper and establish what we hoped to actually demonstrate, which was the landscape, the current landscape of the ineffective pain regimes of people living in aged care. So when we look at aged care now, you know, years ago we used to have different levels of aged care, so we would have people that were of a much lower acuity that would go into aged care earlier than they do now. But there's a lot of aged care packages now, which meant that most people are kept at home for a lot longer and have their physical ailments and their conditions cared for in the home environment, which is actually the optimum if you get the right amount of support in the home environment. Because if you don't get the right amount of support, then you are going to deteriorate faster anyway and end up in aged care. But what's happening is, because of the lack of beds and the lack of facilities and the lack of quality care in aged care, we've been faced with a situation where only people with the highest acuity are now being admitted into aged care. So these are going to be the people that are on massive regimes of medications on a day-to-day basis because their care needs are a lot higher. So that the need and the quality of care is also needs to be escalated in that manner to actually balance it. Medication use is extensive in this cohort. Okay, we're not looking at people that go in that are actually relatively still quite independent, and they might not be on a huge amount of medication regimes. Can we go into the next slide, please? So when we look at chronic pain, we look at, well, I've got acute pain up there because I want you to know the difference there. I mean, when you look at it, it's going to be like post-procedural. If someone has surgery, then they've got acute pain for a short amount of time. If somebody breaks their hip, has to go and have a total hip replacement, yes, short time, they're going to be in pain. And then you've got pain in the context of life-limiting illness, so you've got your cancers. The cancer pain, I can't imagine how debilitating and overwhelming that must be. Both my parents died from cancer and I watched them die in excruciating pain, and I have never felt so helpless in my whole life that I was not able to alleviate that for my own family because of all the laws and the regulations and the intentional barriers and the institutional bias that was associated at that time. I couldn't even help my own parents. And I'll never forget that. And that's another reason why I stand here today advocating for everyone's parents and everyone that suffers chronic pain. Because once again, I don't believe that anyone should have to suffer on that level at this stage of their life. Oh my God, it's meant to be the golden years. You know, what are we doing? So we actually need to understand the severity of this situation and that it can no longer be allowed to continue. We've got chronic somatical visceral pain, we've got osteoarthritis, we've got osteoporosis, neuropathic pain. Neuropathic pain is completely different to musculoskeletal pain, and so nerve pain it's been described to me like razor blades being burnt up your legs or up your back or wherever you've got the neuropathic pain. And a lot of the drugs that have been designed for musculoskeletal pain are prescribed to people with neuropathic pain, but they don't work because they're not designed for neuropathic pain. It's a completely different pathway, it's a different type of pain, and it needs a product that is actually going to demonstrate that, or actually look at examining the different types of pain. We have to look at the core root cause of pain before we treat it. We can't just sit there and go one drug fits all, or one medication fits all, or one approach fits all. We need to look at the type of pain, the core root cause of it, and then look at the individual person, and then create a situation where we can manage their pain that is based on their individual profile. And we must always look at the person because we're all made up completely different from one another. So what we do need is more individual approaches that look at the biological profile of every single person that we care for. And then when we do that, then it may be possible for us to actually look at a whole range of conditions and alleviate that suffering on a much higher level than we have ever thought possible. Okay, let's go to the next one. So when you look at chronic pain, and I always get this wrong, phenomenology, I can always say it in front of a mirror, but when I'm on stage I always stuff it up. But if I say it slowly, I'm all right. Now, what we need to look at, when someone lives in chronic pain, the impact that has on their lifestyle is dramatic. It's massive. It ruins your life. It destroys everything about your quality of life. And anyone that lives with chronic pain would know that. So what we're looking at, inability to maintain normal activity. Now, if you can't maintain normal activity, if you can't even get yourself out of bed to go to the toilet or have a shower without assistance or dress yourself because you can't reach your feet anymore because you're in too much pain, that creates a situation where you start to decline physically. So it's like a domino effect. You have pain up here and then all of a sudden all of these other types of symptoms of pain start to occur. If you're in pain that's unalleviated, you can't sleep. Because even when you try to sleep, you're still in pain. And if you can't sleep, that comes along with a whole lot of other complications that destroys your quality of life even further. I don't know about you guys, but lack of sleep, in my mind, is a killer. If I don't get enough sleep, I'm woolly-headed, I feel like crap, I'm confused, I'm certainly not very sharp and on top of things as I normally would be. I just want to crawl into bed and have a nap. I'm not going to be as eloquent as I normally would be, and I possibly would start getting a bit anxious and agitated and snappy and a bit intolerant, and this all just stems from lack of sleep, let alone having pain compounding that on top of it. You become more sedentary, which obviously if you become more sedentary because you can't do things because it's too painful to do anything, then you run the risk of putting on weight, putting more pressure on your joints, causing more pain, feeling more uncomfortable, stiffening up, contracting, all of those type of complications that come from a sedentary lifestyle. Psychosocial changes are going to occur because if you're in pain constantly, then you can actually become very emotional because you haven't slept well and your emotion stability is going all over the place because you can't get rid of that awful pain that's always there. And you can become depressed, and depression has, a lot of symptoms associated with, can also lead to fatality. When we look at depression, who would want to live with a debilitating condition like chronic pain and other conditions that you usually have when you're old, and then have depression superimposed upon it because it's such an insidious disease? It waits till people are highly vulnerable, and these people are at their most vulnerable. And then it just latches on, and then it causes that spiral into cause suffering and despair, and that in itself can cause destruction on such a massive level. People who live with excruciating pain on a day-to-day basis can become acutely delirious, and acute delirium mimics depression. It also mimics dementia, so you start getting short-term memory loss. You start to get concentration problems. You have comprehension issues. You can have confusion, anxiety, agitation, behavioural changes, all because someone's pain is not being managed effectively because they go into an acutely delirious state. So this is why, again, it's very important for us to know if somebody is living with chronic pain and we take them to the doctor and he goes, they're acutely delirious, well then they need to actually look at what that trigger is and deal with the pain and not treat the delirium but treat the pain. So they need to understand that they have to treat the right areas and the right conditions to actually then get rid of the triggers to all of the complications that occur that are associated with pain. Other physical, you know, someone who's in pain all the time, blood pressure just skyrockets, right? You know, when I don't know how many people here have lived with chronic pain, but when pain gets that bad, your pulse goes up, you sweat, your blood pressure skyrockets. All of those physical changes are very dangerous as well, especially if you're old and you've got cardiac and vascular issues or other issues which mean that you could actually escalate to a stage where you might have strokes, you might have aneurysms, and people just tend to give up. And then you, because you're so vulnerable, because of all of this, you're going to have a much lower resistance to infection, which means you're more likely to then pick up chest infections, UTIs, all the other types of infections that are always going around. And who are the most prominent people that are at risk when they get an infection? The aged and babies. Because if they just get a common cold, they can actually die from that. Because what it can do is, with a lowered resistance and immunosuppressed body type and physical ability, then you're going to get a situation where that'll turn into pneumonia. And then that person's going to get extremely unwell. And so we need to look at all of these things and actually deal with everything as a whole and understand the repercussions of allowing people to live in pain. Okay, let's go to the next one. How much time have I got? Because I'll just rattle on forever. Okay, so cool. Potent opioid analgesics are widely prescribed within aged care, yet these agents are associated with the highest degree of harm. So this, I reckon, is all we need to say. Because when we look at it, the highest degree of drug-related harm, this automatically tells us that what we're advocating for here, which is using medicinal cannabis for the benefits of our older population, there cannot be an argument here, can there? So despite this, they are often partially or completely ineffective at relieving many common forms of chronic pain in aged care. And as I said earlier, with our research, we found that 73%, now that's a massive amount of people. It's not just like 10% or 5%. 73% of our aged care population are not having their pain managed effectively. What is that? That's crap. And we need to do something about it. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Yay. God, I can't even read that. So the downsides of the opioid regime. So we're going to talk a little bit about the opiates now because of the huge amount of side effects that actually come. Now, like I said earlier, I'm not denying the fact that in some cases, opioid regimes are going to be very beneficial to some people. So we can't just take it off the board because there are some people that are going to require those medications to manage their pain. But like I said, it does need to be individualised, and if it's not effectively working, then we need to look at an alternative. So we're looking at the downsides, all of the adjuvant medications that go along with that. We're looking at polypharmacy, looking at cascading effects. The longer that people are on opioid regimes, the higher their tolerance rises, so then they have to be ordered more and more and more and more and more, and this is when overdoses occur, etc. It exacerbates debility because of the sedative and tranquilizing effects of a lot of these drugs. So, in my mind, sitting in a chair for the rest of your life and dribbling is not a life. So what we need to do is understand the repercussions of actually prescribing huge amounts of medications where the effect is huge sedative effects, huge tranquilizing effects. And not only that, when you're looking at old vulnerable people that are frail, if you sedate or tranquilize them, what's going to happen? They're going to fall. And then you're looking at the whole lot of complications that occur with serious fall-related injury. If somebody breaks their hip and they're 85 years old, it's very likely that that's going to be the end for them. It's like a bit of a death knell. And so what we need to understand is the repercussions of over-prescribing certain medications, especially when we know they're not working. Nausea and vomiting, not much fun if you're feeling constantly nauseous, constantly vomiting, because what happens? Your intake's going to decrease, you're not going to want to eat, you're going to waste away, your physical ability is going to deteriorate, you're going to get dehydrated, and when you're dehydrated you become acutely delirious. See how these patterns just keep on working, and it's all because of these regimes. You're going to have adverse effects with drug interactions, and then there's just other burdens as well as administrative burdens, etc. But I'm not really going to go into that because it's not really crucial. All right, next one. Well, I won't go into that because I don't know how many medical professionals are here, and these are just a lot of the drugs that are actually prescribed on a daily basis in regards to opioid regimes, and a lot of them have very serious side effects of their own. Okay, so I think that's all I need to say about that slide. Chronic pain, in regards to WHO, which is the World Health Organisation, they do have a defined daily dose, which is a criteria that people have to meet when they prescribe opiates to older people. Now, what they are saying is no one should ever have more than 75 milligrams of oxycodone, 100 milligrams of morph, and 300 of Tramadol. Now, they don't tend to use Tramadol these days as much anymore because it's such a hideous drug. It makes everyone feel filthy sick all the time and nauseous, and they don't really tolerate it that well. But what we have found is that oxycodone's gone through the roof. And what's happening is people are being prescribed over the defined daily dose. So that's placing a highly vulnerable population again at incredible risk. And that's another area that needs to be seriously considered. Okay. The current regimes that we're looking at, this is the problem we face. Low efficacy. They're not working. So we need to stop brushing it under the carpet and understand that the medical profession, in fact all of us as a community, need to actually understand that if it's not working, we do need to find an alternative approach. Excessive toxicity. So people are having so much medication that it's becoming toxic and it's destroying their quality of life, or they're dying. There is high risk and safety concerns associated with them. There is insufficient access to viable alternatives and the outrageous cost. So it basically demonstrates that this is actually quite an urgent area that we can't sit down on our laurels for any longer about, and we need to actually work towards making a difference to the quality of life of the people that we care for, or the older people living with chronic pain. Okay, so I've already said that, so we can go past that. There we go, insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Very smart man, Einstein. Because for me, as an evidence-based girl, and having always looked at evidence to base all of my research on, as soon as I find, thank you, that something's not cool, then I change it. Because I'm not going to keep doing something that's not working. And to me, that's common sense. But I've also found that common sense isn't that common. So if I have to stand here and tell people how to use common sense, then so be it. That's what I'll do. I will challenge you with the facts and show you that there has to be another approach. Okay, next one. Because I want to read you something at the end as well. So it is suggested we explore and consider 3 clinical-based, evidence-based research, the scope for the potential positive and significant impact of the utilisation of medicinal cannabis as an alternative to current pain management regimes. There is no reason why we can't, in my books. Yes, we have, like I said earlier, a lot of intentional barriers with the department. We've got our SASCAT A and B frameworks, which in my mind don't actually effectively allow us to get approval through for the amount of people that actually require it. Unfortunately, the people that are putting the approvals through are still sending back denials to a lot of the GPs that do put those approvals through, and the amount of paperwork and documentation that's required is ridiculous. They don't have to do that for opiates. So therefore, the frameworks need to be adjusted in a way so that access is actually available to the people that need it. Not 6 months later, or not, oh my God, well, it's too late now because they've died. It shouldn't take this long. So what they need to do is adjust those frameworks. Yes, we need frameworks in place and guidelines and guidance, etc. But there's already frameworks in place that allow us to sit there and go, okay, if we put someone on any new medication, then this is the review process. And there's a review process like that. I think it's the next slide. Is it the next slide? No, it's the next one. Oh, no, it's the next one. Oh, God, it must be the next one. There it is. Okay, so that's the one that we use for opioids now. So it's already written. So why is it we can't just supplement this existing framework? Doesn't take a rocket scientist to work that one out. That we can just use this, and then if somebody gets prescribed cannabis, we use the same format. We just regulate it, we review it, we look at our patients and we say, okay, is it working? Is it not? Titrate it, give them different dosages, start off slow, graduate it, do it in a way that monitors the efficacy of every individual that we're caring for, like they do with the opioids, or they're supposed to do with the opioids. I don't know how many prescribers actually use this, but I'm sure a lot of them do when they do it well. But this process can actually be adjusted accordingly to allow us to prescribe medicinal cannabis. So they can't sit there and go, oh, we don't have a framework, because we do. We just have to supplement opioids for medicinal cannabis. It's actually quite simple. All right, next one. So I think I've only got a few minutes left. Okay, so the challenges that we are dealing with obviously are unclear state and territory regulations, a lack of clinical guidelines for physicians. Now we do have to, give credit where it's due. Our GPs do a really amazing job, and they're doing the best they can in a climate where they haven't been given enough information. So what we need to do is ensure that they are given enough information so they can be confident in prescribing cannabis to their patients. And it's just like with anything. Education's the key. Knowledge is power. So I work with Professor Ian Brighthope from the National Institute of Integrative Medicine, and 3 times a year we put on a seminar for GPs. And we teach them everything that they need to know to successfully prescribe medicinal cannabis. And what we're doing is going from state to state and making sure that we equip them in a way that they do feel confident. Because we do have to also be aware that when we work in the medical field, we cannot place people at risk. So what we need to do is do it in a way that eliminates that risk. And once we do that, then we can successfully move forward into an area where all of our GPs will feel a lot happier about prescribing, and prescribing the right thing for the right condition. Because once again, like I said, one medication doesn't fit all. So we need to look at the condition we're dealing with and actually look at reproducible titrations that are going to actually be specifically used for each condition that we look at, because there's a plethora of conditions that old people live with on a day-to-day basis. In fact, old age certainly isn't for sissies, because the amount of conditions that they do live with on a day-to-day basis is extremely debilitating. Positive movement, well, I've got special access schemes there. It's thought to be a positive movement, but I still say it's an intentional barrier. Domestic manufacturing from 2018, there's cheaper local medicines. Chronic pain is a primary focus for many cannabis companies, so there's that overlap. education I've talked about, and the lobbying efforts of patients, the industry, medical professionals. Everybody's working together here for the same vision, which is a wonderful thing, because that's when we can create change on a much higher level. Okay, next one. No? I love this slide. Why is marijuana against the law? It grows naturally upon our planet. Doesn't the idea of making nature against the law seem to you a little bit unnatural? Right? So what I just want to do is just read you a little bit here to finish off with. I believe that this topic really shouldn't be causing causing such division in society due to political correctness. The bottom line is we ought to be analysing cannabis only in relation to its efficacy in alleviating suffering for specific conditions. That's the bottom line. So basing it on the necessity of promoting a civilised and humane philosophy of care for our society. I suggest we continue to challenge why people continue to waste valuable time stigmatising and demonising medicinal cannabis. Throughout history, no one ever really got anywhere by playing it safe. And given the high prevalence of chronic unrelieved pain in our aged care population, this should be regarded as a matter of high priority and focus. And we are duty-bound to honour that. So consider the present alternative, which is we continue ignoring the significant benefit of cannabis as a valuable complementary medicine, and refuse to contemplate the countless areas where traditional medicine is ineffectively managing critical conditions. In supporting the concept of a compassionate and empathetic culture, it's time for us to avoid and negate the subjective viewpoints based purely on stereotypical interpretations of street cannabis. Bureaucratic law is enabling a gross injustice against our population in need by continuing to construct negative viewpoints related to outdated, propagated, rigid regulations. Intentional barriers and stigma continue. Therefore, I advocate that the benefits of medicinal cannabis in treating poorly managed, intractable chronic pain in our aged care population should be considered a beneficial alternative to alleviating suffering and enhancing quality of life, maximising dignity, value, comfort and well-being in Australia's aged care population. Thank you. If you go to the last slide...
Thank you, Leah.
Maybe. It's got the publication on the last slide. Maybe questions. Yeah, sure. Oh, no, it isn't. I thought I had the actual publication there, but it's in the Journal of Pharmacy Research and Practice. There it is. Yay. So that's the actual paper. Unfortunately, you have to subscribe to the publication, of course, to get it. But if you email me directly, I can provide you with a copy. Thing is, I wrote it.
Thanks, Leah.
My pleasure.
Have we finished? No questions? Thanks, Leah, very much.
Thank you.
So is Sean here? Sean, you want to come up and tell your story quickly? That'd be great before we have a break. So, how are you going with the heat? Anyway, Sean will just be a few minutes. There's a few different people who've used cannabis.